A blind little girl, rejected by those who should have protected her, gets lost in the heart of a forest where no one dares to enter. But what a wild horse did when he found her left everyone speechless. The morning dawned peacefully in Fairview, painting the slopes of the Blue Ridge Mountains with golden tones that danced among the treetops. Emma walked through her grandparents' backyard, her bare feet familiar with every stone, every uneven patch of ground from memory. At 6 years old, the girl had developed an intimacy with the world that few could understand. Her eyes couldn't see, but her heart perceived every whisper of the wind, every fragrance the air carried. "Grandma Martha, the jasmine smells stronger today," Emma said, stopping near the flower bed where the white blossoms grew. Martha smiled, watching her granddaughter with that mixture of pride and tenderness that only a grandmother can feel. At 72, she carried in her silver hair the wisdom of someone who had lived intensely, and in her calloused hands the love of someone who had carefully tended to 3 generations. "That's because it rained during the night, my flower. The earth is happy, and the plants respond with their sweetest perfumes," she explained, while hanging clothes on the line with precise and loving movements. Grandpa Henry appeared on the porch, carrying a steaming cup of coffee. A man of few words but strong presence, he had learned to communicate with Emma through gentle gestures and stories told in a soft voice during rainy afternoons. "Emma, come here, little one. I brought a surprise for you," he called, with that hoarse and affectionate voice the girl loved so much. She ran toward her grandfather, her steps sure and confident. In his hands, she found a small bamboo flute, smooth and fragrant. "Did Grandpa Henry make this for me?" she asked, passing her fingers delicately over the surface of the instrument. "I did, my little granddaughter, and I'll teach you to play the songs my father taught me, those that speak to the mountain winds." Martha observed the scene with a warmed heart, but a slight shadow of concern crossed her gaze. For several days she had been feeling an uneasiness she couldn't explain. It was as if nature were whispering warnings that her mind hadn't yet fully decoded. "Martha, are you all right?" asked Henry, noticing his wife's expression. "It's this strange feeling that won't leave me, Henry, as if something's about to change," she replied, lowering her voice so Emma wouldn't hear. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of a car climbing the dirt road. It was unusual. Few people visited the simple house at the edge of the forest, and the engine's rumble sounded different from the familiar vehicles of the neighborhood. Emma raised her head, her heightened senses immediately catching the change in the environment. The sound was of an expensive, well-maintained car. The scent carried by the wind bore notes of masculine cologne, leather, and something she associated with the big city. "Who could that be?" Martha murmured, walking toward the gate. A man stepped out of the vehicle, tall, well-dressed, with clothes that contrasted dramatically with the simplicity of the place. His hair was perfectly styled, his shoes gleaming even under the dust from the road. Robert Miller had returned. "Good morning," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I've come to visit my daughter." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with years of absence and unhealed wounds. Emma felt a change in her grandparents' breathing, a tension that settled in the air like a heavy cloud before a storm. "Daddy?" whispered the girl, her voice small and uncertain. Robert approached, but his movements were calculated, almost mechanical. When he knelt to be at Emma's height, she sensed his discomfort. His hands, when they touched hers, were cold and tense. "Hello? Emma, you've grown so much," he said, but the words sounded rehearsed, empty of genuine emotion. Martha crossed her arms, her maternal instincts on high alert. "Robert, you haven't shown up here in over 2 years. What do you want?" "I want to get to know my daughter better. I have rights and I have responsibilities too," he replied, standing up and adjusting his suit. "I thought I could take Emma for some outings, show her other parts of the town." "Emma doesn't need to leave here. She has everything she needs," Henry retorted, with unusual firmness in his typically gentle voice. Robert laughed softly, a sound that carried no joy. "She needs to know the world beyond this simplicity. She needs better opportunities." Emma held the bamboo flute against her chest, feeling the climate of tension growing around her. The charm she always carried on her neck, the small silver horseshoe from her great-grandmother, began to warm subtly against her skin. "You don't need to decide anything today," continued Robert, sensing the grandparents' resistance. "I just came to re-establish contact. We can talk more about this in the coming days." He addressed Emma again, forcing his voice to sound sweet. "Daddy will be back soon, okay? We'll spend more time together." After he left, leaving a cloud of dust and discomfort in the air, the family remained silent for long minutes. Emma broke the silence first. "Grandma, why does Daddy's heart beat so fast when he talks to me?" Martha knelt beside her granddaughter, embracing her tenderly. "Sometimes, my flower, people get nervous when they don't know how to show real love." But deep down, she knew there was something more disturbing about that visit, and as Emma began to play her new flute softly, the first notes mingled with the wind coming down from the mountain, carrying with it the ancient whispers of the dawn. Forest. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We'll continue. The 3 days following Robert's visit brought an uneasiness that hung over the house like very persistent fog. Martha woke up earlier, scanned the yard with an attentive eye, and checked the door locks with redoubled care. Henry, a man of simple routines, also showed signs of concern, checking the medicinal plants more frequently, as if seeking answers in the ancestral herbs for the discomfort he felt. Emma, with her heightened sensitivity, noticed every change in her grandparents' behavior. The rhythm of Martha's breathing during morning prayers was altered. Henry's footsteps across the yard sounded heavier, laden with a tension she couldn't completely understand, but felt on her skin like a change in temperature. "Grandpa, why are you stepping harder on the ground?" Emma asked on Thursday morning as he watered the garden beds. Henry stopped, surprised by his granddaughter's perceptive observation. "What do you mean, little one?" "Your feet are making a different sound, like when we step on broken eggs." "Are you worried about something?" The old man sighed, kneeling beside Emma. "It's just that sometimes we feel things in the air, you know, like when it's going to rain, but there aren't any clouds in the sky yet." It was then that Martha called from the kitchen, her voice carrying a note of alarm. "Henry, come see this!" They rushed into the house, where the grandmother pointed to the kitchen window that overlooked the backyard. "Look at these footprints in the wet soil," she said, indicating strange marks near the basil patch. Henry examined the impressions carefully. They were human footprints, but something about them stood out. The shape was strange, as if whoever had stepped there wore shoes with smooth soles, expensive ones, completely unsuitable for walking on wet ground. "Looks like someone walked here during the night," he murmured, following the trail with his eyes. "But who would come all the way up here just to walk around our yard?" Martha questioned, crossing her arms with a worried expression. Emma approached the window, resting her hands on the sill. Even without seeing the footprints, she could sense something different in the air. The charm on her neck was warm, emitting a gentle heat that she had begun to associate with moments of alertness. "There's still a cologne smell," she said, sniffing the air coming through the window. "It's the same smell that Daddy brought the other day." The silence that followed was dense. The grandparents exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them, loaded with decades of complicity and mutual concern. During lunch, the atmosphere remained tense. Martha pushed her food around without appetite, lost in thought. Henry drummed his fingers on the table, a habit he developed when anxious. "Do you think Daddy might have come back here at night?" asked Emma, breaking the silence. "Why would he do that, my flower?" replied Martha, trying to keep her voice calm. "I don't know. But when he was here the other day, I felt like he wanted to say something he didn't say. Like when you want to tell a secret but are afraid." The girl's words touched a sensitive point. Martha remembered the strange expression in Robert's gaze, the way he observed Emma, as if he were evaluating something, calculating. In the afternoon, while Emma played in the yard with her flute, practicing the first notes Henry had taught her, the sound of another car interrupted the tranquility. This time it was Robert returning. He stepped out of the vehicle with a forced smile, carrying a colorful package in his hands. "I brought a present for Emma," he announced, before even properly greeting the grandparents. Emma stopped playing, turning her face toward her father's voice. The charm immediately warmed, a sensation she was beginning to associate specifically with his presence. "How thoughtful," said Martha, but her tone was far from grateful. Robert approached Emma and placed the package in her hands. She carefully felt the package before opening it, revealing a porcelain doll with elaborate clothes. "It's a very special doll," said Robert. "It has real hair and handmade clothes." Emma held the doll delicately, running her fingers over the details. It was beautiful, sophisticated, but something about it seemed cold. It didn't have the warmth of the cloth dolls that Martha sewed for her, didn't carry the cozy smell of home. "Thank you, Daddy," she said, but her voice sounded distant. "Emma, how about tomorrow I take you to see some beautiful places in town? We could have lunch out, visit interesting shops," suggested Robert, casting a challenging look at the grandparents. "She doesn't need to leave here for anything," Henry retorted immediately. "With all due respect, I am her father. I have the right to spend time with my daughter," replied Robert, and for the first time his voice carried a note of authority that sounded almost threatening. Emma felt the tension grow around her like a brewing storm. The charm was almost hot now, pulsing against her skin in a rhythmic way like an accelerated heart. "Daddy," she said softly, "did you come back here last night?" The question caught Robert off guard. For a moment his smile faltered and he hesitated before answering. "Of course not, Emma. Why would you think that?" But Emma had caught the change in his breathing, the increase in his heartbeat, the sweat that beaded on his forehead despite the mild afternoon climate. "Just asking," she said simply, but hugged the doll closer to her chest, as if seeking protection. When Robert left, leaving promises to return the next day, Martha finally verbalized what everyone was thinking. "That man is plotting something, Henry, and I don't like what I'm feeling at all." Henry nodded gravely, looking toward the forest that extended behind their property. That afternoon he swore he had heard distant neighing coming from the woods, sounds he hadn't heard in many years, as if the ancient guardians were awakening. Friday morning dawned differently. A dense fog covered the mountain slopes, creating an ethereal atmosphere that seemed to herald changes. Emma woke with a strange sensation, as if she had dreamed of running horses but couldn't remember the details. Her great-grandmother's charm was warmer than normal against her skin, pulsing gently. "Grandma, why is the air heavier today?" asked Emma during breakfast, slowly stirring the spoon in her cup of warm milk. Martha looked out the window, observing how the fog danced between the trees of the forest. "Sometimes nature dresses in mystery, my flower. It's as if it wants to tell us something important." Henry was particularly quiet, mechanically tending to the medicinal plants. During the night, he had again heard the distant neighing, clearer this time, as if they were gradually approaching the house. That's when the familiar sound of Robert's car interrupted the morning quiet. He arrived earlier than on previous days, wearing casual clothes that contrasted with the impeccable suit of his earlier visits. He carried a small backpack and a smile that tried to appear spontaneous. "Good morning," he greeted with forced enthusiasm. "What a perfect morning for an outing, don't you think?" Emma immediately felt the change in his posture. There was something different about him today, a determination that didn't exist before, mixed with poorly disguised nervousness. "Robert, with all this fog, it's not a day to take the girl out," protested Martha, crossing her arms protectively. "Oh, it's just a morning fog. It will soon dissipate," he replied, addressing Emma directly. "What do you say, daughter? Ready to see special places?" Emma hesitated. Part of her felt curious about the places her father wanted to show her, but a larger part, the one connected to the instincts that Martha had taught her to listen to, whispered silent warnings. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice small and cautious. "Surprise," said Robert, forcing animation into his voice. "Places from my childhood, beautiful trails. I promise you'll like it." Henry approached, placing a protective hand on Emma's shoulder. "The girl doesn't know these trails. It could be dangerous." "I'll be with her the whole time," retorted Robert, but there was growing impatience in his voice. "I'm her father. For God's sake, I have the right to spend a day with my own daughter." The legal argument hung in the air. As much as the grandparents felt apprehension, they knew that technically Robert was right about his paternal rights. Emma sensed the growing tension and, in an attempt to ease the conflict, softly agreed. "Okay, Daddy, but do you promise we'll be back before dinner?" Of course, Robert hastened to answer. "We'll be back before dusk." Martha helped Emma put on a thicker coat and checked that she had the charm around her neck. When her fingers touched the small, silver horseshoe, she noticed it was strangely warm. "Take this too," she said, placing a small sachet of herbs in the pocket of Emma's coat. "These are Grandma's protective herbs." Robert observed the ritual with poorly disguised impatience, drumming his fingers against his leg. When they finally left, Emma held her father's hand but noticed it was damp with sweat, despite the cool morning weather. The car followed familiar roads at first, passing through the town centre, the main square, the church where Emma sometimes went with her grandparents. But gradually they took paths she didn't recognize. The sound of asphalt gave way to gravel, then to dirt road. "Daddy, where are we?" asked Emma, noticing by the change in sounds and smells that they were moving away from civilization. "Almost." "There," he replied, but his voice sounded tense. "It's a special place, you'll see." Emma noticed that the conversation, which at the beginning of the journey Robert had forced with comments about the landscape and questions about her routine, had become scarce. A heavy silence took over the interior of the vehicle, broken only by the rumble of the engine and the sound of tires on the uneven ground. The smell began to change too. The urban air was replaced by the aroma of dense vegetation, moist earth, moss, and wildflowers. Emma recognized it immediately. They were approaching the Dawn Forest. "Daddy," she said, a note of apprehension growing in her voice, "are we going to the forest?" "It's a beautiful place," was all he replied, but Emma noticed how his breathing had accelerated. The car finally stopped. When Robert opened the door, a gust of cold, damp air invaded the vehicle, carrying with it the intense perfume of virgin forest. Emma got out slowly, her feet touching soft ground, covered with dry leaves and moss. "This way," said Robert, taking her hand more firmly than before. They walked along a narrow trail. Emma could hear the rustling of leaves under their steps, the distant singing of birds, the whisper of the wind among the treetops. But there was something else, something that made her charm pulse with greater intensity, a presence as if they were being watched. "It's very quiet here," commented Emma, trying to mask her growing discomfort. "It's the tranquility of nature," replied Robert, but Emma caught the falseness in his voice. They continued walking, going deeper into the thickness of the forest. The morning fog still persisted among the trees, creating ghostly shapes that seemed to move at the periphery of perception. Emma began to count steps mentally, a habit she had developed to avoid getting lost. 500 steps. 1,000 steps. 1,500. They were very far from the car now, very far from any familiar place. It was then that Robert stopped abruptly. "Sit here on this rock," he said, his voice carrying a strange coldness. "Daddy's going to look for something over there. Stay quiet, okay?" Emma sat on the indicated rock, but her entire body was on alert. The charm now pulsed almost frantically, and she could smell fear. Not her own, but Robert's, an acidic smell that mixed with his expensive cologne. "Daddy, you won't be long, right?" she asked, but she already knew deep in her heart that something terrible was about to happen. "No, I won't be long," he lied, and Emma heard his steps moving away, becoming increasingly distant, until absolute silence settled around her. She waited, counted to 100, then to 200, called for him, her voice getting lost among the echoes of the forest, and it was then that she understood, with painful clarity, that she was alone in the immensity of the Dawn Forest, abandoned by her own father in a place where few ventured, even during the day. The silence that settled after Robert's disappearance was different from any quiet that Emma had ever experienced. It wasn't the welcoming silence of her grandparents' house during a restful afternoon, nor the tranquility of mornings in the yard. It was a vast, deep silence that seemed to swallow her whole, making her feel small and vulnerable in the heart of the forest. Emma remained seated on the rock for long minutes, fighting against the panic that threatened to take hold of her chest. Her great-grandmother's charm pulsed against her skin with an intensity she had never felt before, as if it were a second heart beating out of sync with her own. "Daddy?" she called again, her trembling voice echoing among the trees. "Daddy, where are you?" Only the whisper of the wind through the leaves answered her, carrying with it the intense perfume of wildflowers and the damp smell of moss-covered earth. Tears began to well in her eyes, but Martha's voice echoed in her memory. "When you feel lost, my flower, take a deep breath and listen to what nature has to tell you. She never abandons those pure of heart." Emma wiped away the tears with the back of her hand and concentrated on her other senses. The forest was alive around her. She could hear the rustling of small animals in the undergrowth, the melodious song of birds she didn't know, the gentle dripping of condensed moisture on the leaves. It was then that a different sound reached her ears, distant but unmistakable, the rhythmic sound of hooves against the forest floor. It wasn't the frantic gallop of an animal in flight, but the steady, assured trot of one who knows every stone, every root of the path. Emma rose from the rock, turning her face toward the sound. The charm warmed even more, but this time the sensation wasn't one of alert, but of recognition. It was as if the small silver horseshoe was responding to an ancient call, an echo from times when the visible and invisible worlds walked closer together. The sound of hooves approached. Emma could feel the vibrations in the ground through her bare feet. She had lost her shoes during the walk, but only now realized it. The smell in the air changed, too, carrying notes of freedom, of pure mountain wind, of something wild and powerful. And then it appeared. Emma couldn't see it, but she felt its presence with a clarity that transcended vision. It was large, majestic, radiating an energy that made the air around it vibrate gently. When the animal approached, she extended her hand hesitantly, and her fingers met a silky coat, softer than any fabric she had ever touched. The horse was warm, its breath forming small clouds of vapor in the cool forest air. It showed no sign of aggression or fear. On the contrary, it lowered its majestic head, allowing Emma to caress its forehead, as if it had known her for a long time. "Who are you?" whispered Emma, passing her hands delicately through the mane that seemed to have the texture of liquid. "Silk?" The horse responded with a low neigh, a deep vibration that she felt more in her chest than heard with her ears. It was a sound that carried ancient melodies, stories told by the wind, secrets whispered by centuries-old trees. Emma remembered the stories Martha told during rainy nights, about the free spirits of the forest, ancestral guardians who manifested as sacred animals to protect those in need. She had always thought they were just beautiful legends, tales to lull her to sleep. But now, with her hands resting on the real coat of this magnificent being, she understood that some stories are much more than words. The horse gracefully lay down beside the rock where Emma had been sitting, silently inviting her to settle. Beside it, she didn't hesitate. Nestling against the warm body of the animal, she felt a security she hadn't experienced since leaving home that morning. The horse's breathing was rhythmic, calm, and Emma discovered that her own heartbeats began to synchronize with its. It was as if they were two musical instruments finding the same tuning, creating a perfect harmony in the silence of the forest. "Did you come to get me?" asked Emma, resting her head against the animal's neck. The horse moved its head gently, as if nodding, and Emma felt a strange vibration in the air. Other sounds began to reach her ears, distant neighs coming from different directions, as if an entire herd were dispersed throughout the forest, observing, protecting. The charm had stopped pulsing frantically and now emitted a constant, comforting warmth. Emma understood that she was exactly where she should be, under the protection of forces that her rational mind couldn't explain, but that her heart completely accepted. Meanwhile, the afternoon advanced. The morning fog had dissipated, allowing golden rays of sunshine to filter through the tree canopy, creating patterns of light and shadow that danced around her. Emma felt strangely at peace, as if time had stopped in that magical place. The horse remained alert even at rest, its mobile ears capturing sounds that Emma couldn't perceive. From time to time it raised its majestic head, looking toward invisible trails, as if in constant communication with other guardians of the forest. That's when Emma heard distant human voices. They were familiar voices, laden with concern and determination. Her heart leapt with joy when she recognized the unmistakable voice of Martha, calling her name through the woods. The horse rose gracefully, as if it too had heard the voices. But instead of moving away, it remained at Emma's side, like a guardian determined to protect her until safe help arrived. "They came looking for me," whispered Emma, tears of relief rolling down her cheeks. "Grandma Martha and Grandpa Henry came to find me." The horse neighed softly, a sound that seemed to say, "I knew they would come. Those who truly love always find the way." And as the voices approached, Emma understood that her adventure in the Dawn Forest had only just begun, and that the bonds that united her to that magical place and its mysterious guardians would be much deeper than she had ever imagined. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We'll continue. Martha had felt the exact moment when something ruptured in the universe. She was hanging clothes on the line when a sudden pain shot through her chest, as if a part of her soul had been torn away. Her trembling hands released the sheet she was holding, and she leaned against the yard fence, breathing with difficulty. "Henry!" she called, her voice laden with urgency. "Henry, something happened to Emma." Henry came running from the garden, still holding the hoe dirty with soil. When he saw his wife's pale face and the panic in her eyes, he immediately understood that their worst suspicions had been confirmed. "That man, that wretch did something to our girl," murmured Martha, the words coming out broken between the tears that began to spring forth. Without wasting time, Henry ran into the house and returned, carrying the old forest map that had belonged to Martha's grandmother. The yellowed parchment was marked with ancient symbols, secret trails that few people still remembered how to interpret. "If he took her to the forest, we'll find her," he said, his voice carrying an iron determination that Martha hadn't seen in years. "Get the protective herbs, the family talismans, and that old lantern. We'll need everything." Martha ran to the bedroom, opening a cedar chest that held family treasures accumulated over generations. She removed sachets of dried herbs, necklaces of blessed seeds, polished stones that shone with their own light, and a cloak woven with special fibers that her great-grandmother had left with specific instructions, to be used only when the worlds touch. Meanwhile, Henry studied the map carefully. The markings showed not only the physical trails of the forest, but also energy points, places where the boundary between the material and spiritual worlds became thinner. "Look here," he said, pointing to a mark at the center of the map. "The clearing of connections. If the guardians have awakened to protect our girl, that's where she'll be." They left immediately, taking only a backpack with the sacred objects and a determination that moved. Mountains. The path to the forest seemed shorter when traveled by love and the urgency to find Emma. As they entered the woods, Martha immediately noticed that something had changed. The air vibrated with a different energy, more intense, as if ancient. Forces had awakened from a long sleep. The plants seemed greener, more alive, and even the light filtering through the treetops had a golden, almost magical quality. "Are you feeling this too?" she asked Henry, who walked ahead of her following the map's markings. "The forest is awake," he replied simply. "I haven't felt this energy in a long time. It's as if the entire forest is mobilized." They followed trails that hadn't been used in decades, but which opened naturally before them, as if the forest itself were guiding them. Martha carried the special cloak folded in her arms, feeling it gradually warm as they approached the center of the forest. That's when they heard the first neigh. The sound echoed through the trees, deep and melodious, carrying an ancestral music that made both their hearts quicken with hope. Then came another neigh from a different direction, and then another, as if a silent conversation was taking place among magnificent creatures dispersed throughout the forest. "The free spirits," whispered Martha, her tears now of gratitude. They're protecting our Emma. Guided by the sounds, they quickened their pace. The ancestral map led them along paths that seemed to reveal themselves as they advanced. Roots curving to form natural steps, low branches rising so as not to hinder their passage. And then they saw the clearing. It was a place that transcended common beauty, where flowers of impossible hues sprouted in perfect geometric patterns, radiating a soft light that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. In the center of the clearing, Emma was lying beside a magnificent horse, its coat shining like liquid metal under the golden light. "Emma!" shouted Martha, running toward her granddaughter. The girl raised her head upon hearing her grandmother's voice, a radiant smile lighting up her face. "Grandma, I knew you would find me." The horse rose gracefully when the grandparents approached, but it didn't move away. Instead, it lowered its majestic head in a gesture that seemed a respectful greeting, as if it recognized in them worthy guardians of Emma. Martha knelt beside her granddaughter, embracing her with an intensity that contained all the love and desperation of the past hours. "My flower, are you all right? You're not hurt?" "I'm fine, Grandma. He protected me," said Emma, caressing the horse's muzzle. "And it wasn't just him. There are others too, scattered throughout the forest. They've been taking care of me since Daddy left me here." Henry, practical even in the face of the supernatural, examined Emma carefully, checking if she was injured or traumatized. He found only a serene girl, connected with forces he had grown up respecting but had never witnessed so directly. "What that man did is unforgivable," he murmured, his voice laden with controlled anger. "He was afraid, Grandpa," Emma said surprisingly. "I felt his fear when he brought me here. It wasn't just wickedness, it was fear of something." Martha unfolded the ancestral cloak, covering Emma with it. Immediately, the clearing filled with an even more intense light, and other neighs echoed through the forest as if an entire herd were celebrating the reunion. "This place is more special than I imagined," said Martha, looking around with reverence. "The stories my grandmother told were true. This is a portal, a place where our world meets that of the Guardians." The horse that had protected Emma approached Martha, gently touching her hand with its muzzle. In that touch she received images, sensations, understandings that flowed through her mind like crystalline water. She saw her family's ancestral connection to that place, saw Emma's special purpose, saw that the girl was not just a blind child, but a living bridge between worlds. "Emma," she said softly, "you've always been special, but now I understand why. You have a gift that goes beyond common senses. You can connect with the Guardians because you have a pure heart and an ancient soul." Emma smiled, holding her grandmother's hand while continuing to caress the protective horse. "Can I come back here other times, Grandma? I feel like this place is part of me." Martha looked at Henry, who nodded gravely. Both understood that Emma's life had changed forever that day, and that the forest would always be part of her journey. "Yes, my flower," she finally replied. "But now we need to go home. There are some things we need to resolve about your father." The return from the sacred clearing to the grandparents' home happened in contemplative silence. Emma walked between Martha and Henry, still wrapped in the ancestral cloak that glowed softly under the light of dusk. The protective horse had accompanied them to the edge of the forest, where it stopped, as if respecting an invisible boundary between the magical and everyday worlds. "Will he be okay?" asked Emma, turning toward where she knew the animal remained watching. "The Guardians don't need our care, my flower," replied Martha lovingly. "They exist to care for us, but the connection you created today is eternal. Whenever you need him, he'll be there." As they approached the town, they noticed unusual agitation. Groups of people were conversing in low tones at corners. Gestures of indignation punctuated the conversations, and curious looks turned to them as they passed. Mrs. Sullivan, a longtime neighbor, ran to meet them as soon as she spotted Emma. "Martha!" "Thank God you found the girl," she exclaimed, embracing Emma with genuine affection. "The whole town is talking about what that man did." "What do you mean?" asked Henry, furrowing his brow. "Well, he appeared in the square late in the afternoon, all disheveled with dirty clothes and messy hair. He was visibly disturbed, walking back and forth, mumbling things that nobody really understood. Martha felt a knot in her stomach. And then, Jake, that young man who works on his farm, was in town buying supplies. When he saw his boss in that state, he approached to ask if everything was all right. That's when Robert, without realizing that other people were listening, said something terrible. Emma held her grandmother's hand more tightly, her heightened senses catching the growing tension in the neighbor's voice. "What did he say, Mrs. Sullivan?" insisted Martha. "He said he had finally gotten rid of the problem. That now he could go on with life without the weight of imperfection on his conscience." Jake was horrified and asked if he was talking about Emma. Robert then realized he had said too much and tried to cover it up, but it was too late. A group of people had formed around them, all wanting to know if Emma was okay and offering help. The spontaneous solidarity of the small community deeply touched the grandparents' hearts. "There's more," continued Mrs. Sullivan, lowering her voice. Father Michael was passing through the square and heard the conversation. He approached Robert and asked directly where the girl was. Robert got nervous, stammered, said she was safe but couldn't explain where. Henry shook his head, indignant. "And what happened next?" The priest insisted, and Robert eventually admitted that he had taken Emma to the forest for her to learn to fend for herself. He said that a child with a disability needed to develop independence or something like that. The people who were listening were shocked. Emma remained silent, processing the information. Part of her felt a deep sadness for her father, now understanding that he had acted driven by a shame so great that it blinded him to love. "Where is he now?" asked Martha. "Gone. He got in his car and left town, but before that Jake heard him talking on the phone with someone, saying that the plan had worked and that now he could carry on with life normally." The impact of the words hit the grandparents like a punch to the stomach. It hadn't been an impulsive act of a desperate father. It had been premeditated, calculated, cruel. Father Michael approached the group, his face laden with concern and relief at seeing Emma safe and sound. "My child," he said, kneeling to be at Emma's height. "Are you all right? We were all very worried." "I'm fine, Father," replied Emma with surprising maturity. "The forest protected me." The priest observed her attentively, noticing something different about Emma. There was a serenity in her face, a light in her blind eyes that hadn't existed before. It was as if she had undergone a profound transformation. "The forest protected you," he repeated softly. Emma nodded. "The ancient guardians, Father. The stories that Grandma tells are true. They take care of people who have pure hearts." A murmur of admiration passed through the group of neighbors. In a small town where ancient traditions still found respect, Emma's words didn't sound like childish fantasy, but as testimony to something sacred. Martha embraced her granddaughter protectively. "Let's go home. Emma needs to rest." As they walked through the town streets, more people approached to greet Emma and express indignation at what Robert had done. The news had spread quickly, and the community united around the family. At home, finally alone, the three sat in the living room. Emma still wore the ancestral cloak, which had acquired a soft and constant light, as if it were a beacon of protection. "Emma," said Martha delicately, "how do you feel about what your father did?" The girl was silent for long moments, her fingers playing with her great-grandmother's charm that remained warm against her skin. "I feel sorry for him, Grandma," she said finally. "When he took me to the forest, I realized he was suffering as much as I was. He's so afraid of not being perfect that he can't see the beauty in different things." Henry shook his head, amazed at his granddaughter's wisdom. "You are very generous, little one, more generous than he deserves. But do you know what I discovered today in the forest?" continued Emma, her blind eyes shining with an inner light. "I discovered that my blindness is not a limitation. It's a gift, because I can see things that people with normal eyes can't. I can see people's hearts, feel energies, connect with the guardians." Martha felt tears rolling down her face. "I always knew you were special, my flower." "And now I know why I was born this way," said Emma with quiet confidence. It was to be a bridge, to help people understand that true vision doesn't come from the eyes, but from the heart. That night, as Emma slept peacefully in her bed, wrapped in the cloak that now was a permanent part of her life, Martha and Henry talked in whispers in the kitchen. "What will we do if he comes back?" asked Henry. "He won't return," replied Martha with conviction. "And if he does, the entire town now knows who he really is. Besides, Emma is no longer the same girl he abandoned today. She has awakened to her true purpose." Outside, a soft neigh echoed in the distance, coming from the direction of the forest. It was a sound of farewell, but also of promise. The guardians would remain vigilant, ready to protect the girl who had become one of their own. 3 days had passed since Emma's rescue, and the town of Fairview still buzzed with comments about the events. The transformation in the girl was visible to everyone. She walked with a new confidence. Her smile radiated a serenity that deeply touched those who met her, and the ancestral cloak she now always carried glowed softly, as if woven with liquid light. That Monday morning, Martha awoke with a strange sensation, as if ancient voices were whispering in her dreams. She had dreamed of her great-grandmother, the legendary healer who had woven the magical cloak, but this time the dream had been more vivid, more real than a simple memory. "Emma," she called softly, finding her granddaughter in the yard, sitting near the basil patch playing her bamboo flute. "I need to tell you something important. I think it's time you know the whole truth about our family." Emma stopped playing, turning her face toward her grandmother. The great-grandmother's charm pulsed gently against her skin, as if confirming it was the right time for revelations. "What truth, Grandma?" Martha sat beside her granddaughter, her trembling hands holding a small, worn leather diary that Emma had never seen before. "This is the diary of my great-grandmother, Hope. She was the last of a lineage of special women, guardians of the secrets of the Dawn Forest. I always knew these stories, but I never fully understood what they meant, until now." Emma carefully held the diary, running her fingers over the aged leather cover. "What's written here?" "Stories about our family, about the guardians, about an ancient prophecy," replied Martha, her voice laden with emotion. "Hope wrote that. A special child would come, a girl who would be born with eyes closed to the physical world, but with her soul open to higher dimensions. This child would be able to communicate directly with the free spirits and would be responsible for protecting the balance between worlds." Emma felt a shiver run down her spine. "Do you think that she was talking about me?" "I'm certain," said Martha, embracing her granddaughter. "But there's more. According to the prophecy, this child would face a great trial while still young, an abandonment that would lead her to discover her true powers, and after this trial, she would become the new guardian of the forest." Henry approached, carrying a steaming cup of herbal tea. He had heard the conversation, and his face showed a mixture of pride and concern. "There's something else you both need to know," he said, sitting beside them. "Yesterday, when I went to town to buy supplies, I talked with Jake, the young man who works on Robert's farm. He told me things that explain a lot about that man's behavior." Emma and Martha turned to him, attentive. "It seems Robert isn't who we thought he was. Jake said that a few weeks ago, some strange men arrived at the farm, people from the big city, lawyers and businessmen. They had been talking a lot with Robert about resolving family issues and cleaning up his reputation for new business." "What does this have to do with Emma?" asked Martha, furrowing her brow. "Jake overheard part of a conversation between Robert and these men. They were pressuring him to resolve the situation with the disabled daughter because it was harming the company's image. They said that important investors don't like to associate with people who have visible family problems." Emma felt a deep sadness tighten her chest. "So he abandoned me in the forest because I was hindering his business?" "It seems so, my flower," said Henry with contained anger. "But the story doesn't end there. Jake said these men promised Robert a very lucrative partnership if he solved the problem, and they had even suggested more definitive methods." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with terrible implications. "You mean—" began Martha, but couldn't finish the sentence. "I mean that abandoning you in the forest may have been the less radical solution that Robert found," said Henry gravely. "He probably thought you would get lost in the woods and, well, that the problem would solve itself." Emma remained silent for long minutes, processing the information. When she finally spoke, her voice was serene, mature beyond her 6 years. "So the forest really saved me. If the Guardians hadn't protected me—" "But they did protect you," Martha firmly interrupted. "And do you know why? Because you are exactly what the prophecy said, a pure, special child, destined to be the bridge between worlds." It was at that moment that a familiar sound echoed through the air, the soft, melodious neigh that Emma had learned to associate with her protector. But this time the sound came not from the distant forest, but from the yard itself. The three rose and walked toward the gate. There, standing majestically on the dirt road, was the horse that had protected Emma. But it wasn't alone. Beside it were other equally magnificent horses, their coats shining with their own light under the morning sun. "They came all the way here," whispered Emma, amazed. "They've never left the forest before." The protective horse approached the gate, extending its majestic head toward Emma. When she touched its muzzle, images flowed through her mind, visions of the forest, of secret clearings even more powerful than the one where she had been found, of an ancient ceremony that awaited her. "He wants to show me something," said Emma, her eyes shining with emotion. "Something important in the forest. A ceremony, a rite of passage." Martha consulted her great-grandmother's diary, quickly leafing through the yellowed pages. "Here," she exclaimed, "Hope wrote about the ceremony of consecration. It's when the new guardian officially assumes her role, receiving the full powers to protect the balance between worlds." Henry observed the horses with respect and admiration. "If they came all the way here, it's because the time has come. Emma is ready." Emma moved even closer to the horse, which gracefully lowered its body, inviting her to mount. It was an invitation she knew she couldn't refuse, not only because she wanted to, but because she felt deep in her soul that it was her destiny. "Will you come with me?" she asked her grandparents. "Of course," replied Martha, wrapping herself in the warmest shawl she owned. This family never separates in important moments. As they prepared to follow the horses back to the forest, Emma felt a final transformation happening within her. The frightened girl, who had been abandoned 3 days before, had completely disappeared. In her place was emerging a young guardian, ready to assume a role that had been charted long before her birth. Her great-grandmother's charm now shone with a constant light, and the ancestral cloak rippled gently in the wind, as if made of pure energy. The horses neighed in unison, a sound that echoed throughout the town, announcing that something extraordinary was about to happen in the Dawn Forest. The journey back to the Dawn Forest was completely different from all previous ones. Emma rode on the protective horse with a natural grace, as if she had always been a horsewoman. Martha and Henry followed on foot, but the horses themselves adjusted their pace so they could keep up, creating a solemn and majestic procession. As they delved deeper into the woods, the transformation of the environment became increasingly evident. The trees seemed larger, more alive, their leaves shining with a supernatural green. Flowers whose scent Emma had never before sensed bloomed along the path, creating an aromatic trail that guided her senses. The air vibrated with such intense energy that even Henry, always pragmatic, felt shivers of reverence. "It's as if the entire forest were preparing for a celebration," murmured Martha, observing how small birds with golden plumage flew in circles, above them singing melodies she had never heard before. Emma smiled, caressing the silky mane of her horse. "It's happy, Grandma. The forest is happy because it will finally have a guardian again." When they reached the clearing of connections, the spectacle that awaited them surpassed all expectations. The clearing had transformed into a natural amphitheater, where dozens of horses formed concentric circles around the center. Their coats shone with all the colors of the spectrum, from silvery white to deep black, through golden, copper, and iridescent tones that seemed to change as the light touched them. In the center of the clearing, where previously only golden and silver flowers grew, now sprang a crystalline fountain that hadn't existed before. its waters singing an ethereal melody that harmonized with the chorus of birds. "The consecration fountain," whispered Martha, consulting her great-grandmother's diary with trembling hands. "Hope wrote that it only appears when a new guardian is to be consecrated." Emma dismounted the horse with fluid movements, her bare feet touching the sacred earth. Immediately, she felt a deep connection with every element of the clearing. She could hear the whispers of the ancestral trees, feel the synchronized heartbeats of all the horses, perceive the music of the fountain's waters as if it were a cosmic lullaby. The horse that had protected her positioned itself behind her, along with the other guardians, forming an honor guard. Emma walked slowly toward the fountain, the ancestral cloak floating around her as if woven with the wind itself. When she knelt near the crystalline waters, the images began to flow in her mind, visions of all the guardians who had come before, her wise and courageous women who had dedicated their lives to protecting the balance between the human world and the spiritual. She saw her great-grandmother Hope still young, receiving the same consecration decades ago. She saw generations of women from her lineage, all connected by the same sacred purpose. "Emma," a soft voice echoed in her mind, not through her ears, but directly in her heart. It was Hope's voice, her great-grandmother, speaking across dimensions. "Are you ready to accept the responsibility of being the guardian, to protect not only the forest, but all pure-hearted creatures who seek refuge here?" "Yes," replied Emma aloud, her answer echoing throughout the clearing. "I accept." The moment she pronounced these words, the fountain's water began to glow with a golden light. Emma cupped her hands and drank from the sacred water, immediately feeling a transformation course through her entire body. Her other senses sharpened. Even more, her connection with nature deepened, and she knew instinctively that now she could communicate not only with the guardian horses, but with all living beings in the forest. Her great-grandmother's charm, which had gradually warmed over the last few days, now radiated a constant and gentle light. When Emma touched it, she realized it had transformed. It was no longer just a silver horseshoe, but a complex, magical symbol engraved with ancient runes that pulsed with their own life. Martha and Henry observed the ceremony with tears of pride and admiration. They watched their granddaughter transform before their eyes, not losing her sweet and loving essence, but gaining a dimension of wisdom and power that made her truly special. When Emma rose, all the horses neighed in unison, a sound that echoed throughout the mountain range like a celestial chorus, announcing the birth of a new era. The flowers in the clearing shone more intensely, the trees bowed in reverence, and even the wind seemed to change direction to honor the new guardian. "Grandma, Grandpa," said Emma, turning to her grandparents with a radiant smile. "Now I understand everything. I understand why I was born this way, why Daddy brought me here, why you always loved me unconditionally. It was all part of a greater plan." "And your father?" asked Martha softly. "How do you feel about him now?" Emma was silent for a moment, her hands caressing the fountain's water. "I feel compassion for him. He lost the chance to know true love because he was too busy chasing the approval of people who are worth nothing. But perhaps one day, when he understands what he truly lost, he will find peace." Henry shook his head, amazed. "You are wiser than many adults, little one." "Now that I'm the guardian," said Emma, "I can help other people like me, children who feel different, people who are rejected for not fitting into others' standards. The forest will be a refuge for all pure hearts." The horses began to gradually disperse, some remaining in the clearing as permanent guardians, others returning to the secret trails of the forest. Emma's protective horse approached one last time, gently touching her forehead with its muzzle, in a farewell that was also a promise to always be present when needed. The return to town happened at dusk, when the first stars began to appear in the sky. Emma walked between her grandparents, the ancestral cloak now a permanent part of her identity, the charm glowing softly against her chest. When they arrived home, they found Father Michael waiting on the porch, accompanied by some community members who wanted to know if everything was all right. "Emma," said the priest, observing the evident transformation in the girl, "there's something different about you, something luminous." "I'm now the guardian of the Dawn Forest, Father," replied Emma simply. "It's my responsibility to protect the balance and help those who need it." The priest smiled, understanding that he was in the presence of something sacred that transcended his own doctrines. "Then may God bless you in this mission, my child." In the weeks that followed, Emma's fame spread beyond the borders of Fairview. People came from distant towns, seeking her wisdom and guidance. She received everyone with affection, especially those who felt different or rejected by society. Her father never returned. Jake told them that Robert had quickly sold the farm and moved to another region, taking with him only the bitterness of his choices. Emma sometimes thought of him, mentally sending wishes of peace and understanding, but with no bitterness in her heart. And so, in the charming town of Fairview, nestled in the slopes of the Blue Ridge Mountains, a blind 6-year-old girl became the youngest guardian in the history of the Dawn Forest. Her eyes couldn't see the physical world, but her soul illuminated the path for all those who sought the true meaning of life: unconditional love, acceptance of differences, and the sacred connection with all forms of life. And on full moon, nights when the wind whispered among the ancient trees, the inhabitants of Fairview could hear distant neighs coming from the forest, reminding everyone that the guardians were always vigilant, protecting the pure of heart under the leadership of their small and powerful guardian. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a